Most people think they decide with logic. In reality, they decide with identity. Most financial decisions are not made in moments of logic. They are repeated. They feel automatic. They feel familiar. People believe money responds to effort, knowledge, gut, or intention. But long before any conscious choice is made, something else is already deciding. This archive is not about motivation, it is not about strategy, and it is not about belief. It is about the silent structure that shapes every decision, even when you think you are choosing freely. Chapter 1. The Invisible Decision Maker. Most people believe they make financial decisions consciously. They assume money choices are the result of calculation, planning, or rational comparison. But if this were true, patterns would not repeat with such precision. People would not make the same decisions in different circumstances, with different incomes, at different stages of life. And yet they do, again and again, the same types of risks, the same forms of hesitation, the same timing of action and delay, the same outcomes wearing different disguises. This repetition is not accidental. Before logic appears, before reasoning begins, before any financial option is weighed, a quieter force is already at work. An internal structure is already selecting what feels acceptable, possible, or familiar. This structure does not announce itself. It does not argue. It simply decides. This is the invisible decision maker. It is not the mind you identify with. It is not the voice you hear when you think. It is the identity you live from. Identity is not personality. It is not preference. It is the internal framework that defines what feels normal, safe, deserved, or expected. It operates silently, shaping decisions long before awareness arrives. When a financial opportunity appears, most people believe they are evaluating it objectively, but in reality, identity filters the opportunity before evaluation begins. Some possibilities feel immediately not for me, others feel too risky, too unfamiliar, or too good to be true. These reactions do not come from logic, they come from alignment. The invisible decision maker does not ask whether something is beneficial. It asks whether it is coherent with the existing structure. If something threatens identity, it feels uncomfortable. If something confirms identity, it feels natural, and comfort often wins over advantage. This is why people frequently reject opportunities that would improve their situation, not because the opportunity is flawed, but because it conflicts with an internal agreement about who they are allowed to be. The rejection happens quietly, disguised as logic, caution, or timing. I'm not ready yet. It's not the right moment. I need more information. These statements sound reasonable, but beneath them lies a deeper signal: misalignment between identity and outcome. The invisible decision-maker prioritizes consistency over improvement. Consistency feels safe. Improvement feels uncertain. Even when improvement is desired, this is why financial change is often so difficult to sustain. People may temporarily act outside their identity. They may earn more, save more, or take risks for a short period of time. But unless identity shifts, the system eventually corrects itself. Old patterns return, familiar outcomes reappear. Not because success was impossible, but because identity remained unchanged. The invisible decision-maker restores equilibrium. This equilibrium does not aim for happiness or abundance. It aims for familiarity. Familiarity is not always comfortable. Many people are familiar with struggle, instability, or anxiety around money. These states feel unpleasant, but they are known, and the system prefers what is known over what is uncertain. This preference is rarely conscious. People often believe they fear failure, but many fear success just as deeply. Success introduces unfamiliar responsibilities, expectations, and self-perception. It requires a different internal organization. Without that reorganization, success feels unstable. The invisible decision-maker resists instability. It pulls behavior back toward what feels recognizable. This is why knowledge alone rarely changes financial outcomes. People can understand concepts, read books, attend seminars, and still repeat the same behaviors. Information reaches the conscious mind, but the invisible decision-maker remains untouched. It continues to operate from identity, not intellect. The decision-maker does not respond to arguments. It responds to embodiment, how you move through the world, what you tolerate, what you repeat, what you expect. These signals define identity, and identity defines decision. Every purchase, every hesitation, every investment, every delay is shaped by this internal framework. Even decisions that appear spontaneous are guided by long-established patterns. Spontaneity is often structured repetition in disguise. This does not mean people are trapped. It means the source of change is not where most people look. Trying to change decisions without addressing identity is like rearranging symptoms without touching the cause. Behavior may change briefly, but it will not stabilize. Stability requires coherence between identity and action. When identity begins to shift, decisions change naturally, not through effort, but through alignment. What once felt risky begins to feel reasonable. What once felt impossible begins to feel accessible. The internal resistance dissolves quietly. This dissolution is rarely dramatic. People often expect change to feel like motivation or excitement. In reality, deep change feels like neutrality. The emotional charge around decisions fades. Choices feel clearer, less reactive, less loaded. This neutrality is a sign that the invisible decision-maker is reorganizing. As identity loosens, the range of acceptable outcomes expands. New possibilities enter the field without resistance. Decisions adjust themselves. Money responds to this adjustment immediately, not because of belief, but because behavior and expectation have shifted. The invisible decision-maker is not an enemy. It is a mechanism designed to preserve coherence. Once coherence changes, the mechanism updates automatically. This chapter is not asking you to make different decisions. It is asking you to recognize who has been making them. Because until the invisible decision-maker is seen, it remains in control. And once it is seen, the structure begins to change. In Das to dismissed in Chapter 2, Why Smart People Repeat Bad Financial Patterns. Intelligence does not protect people from repeating financial patterns. Education does not guarantee better decisions. Access to information does not automatically translate into change. This reality confuses many because it contradicts what most societies teach, that knowledge leads to better outcomes. And yet, history, both personal and collective, shows otherwise. Highly intelligent people accumulate debt. Well-educated individuals sabotage opportunities. Experienced professionals repeat the same financial mistakes across decades. This repetition is not a failure of understanding. It is a function of identity. Smart people do not repeat bad financial patterns because they lack logic. They repeat them because logic is not the primary driver of behavior. Behavior is driven by emotional familiarity, internal agreements, and deeply rooted expectations about what feels appropriate, safe, or deserved. The invisible decision-maker does not ask, "Is this the smartest choice?" It asks, "Does this choice fit who I am?" When a decision threatens identity, intelligence often works against change rather than supporting it. The mind becomes a defense mechanism. Logic is used to justify familiar behavior, not to transform it. This is why smart people often have excellent explanations for poor outcomes. They can explain why the timing was wrong, why the market was unstable, why the opportunity was flawed, why waiting felt reasonable. These explanations are not lies. They are interpretations filtered through identity. Identity seeks coherence, not optimization. Optimization improves outcomes. Coherence preserves structure, and the system always prioritizes preservation. This preservation instinct developed for survival, not success. In early environments, maintaining identity and belonging mattered more than maximizing resources. Risk carried consequences beyond material loss. Identity protected safety within the group. Modern financial environments are different, but the internal structure remains. Smart people often identify strongly with caution, responsibility, or self-reliance. These identities are socially reinforced and emotionally rewarded, but they can also limit growth. Caution can become avoidance. Responsibility can become rigidity. Self-reliance can become isolation. When these identities dominate, financial decisions are filtered accordingly. Opportunities that require risk, delegation, or expansion feel threatening, not because they are dangerous, but because they challenge identity. This challenge activates resistance. Resistance rarely appears as fear, it appears as rational hesitation. I need to analyze this further. I should wait for more stability. This doesn't align with my values. These statements feel thoughtful, but they often mask discomfort with unfamiliar identity states. The discomfort is not about money, it is about self-perception. Becoming wealthier often requires becoming different routines, different boundaries, different tolerance for uncertainty, different relationships with time, effort, and responsibility. For many smart people, this shift feels destabilizing. They are competent within their current identity. They know how to navigate their existing patterns. Change introduces ambiguity, and ambiguity threatens control. The invisible decision-maker values control. This is why smart people often self-sabotage at transition points. Just as momentum builds, something interrupts. A distraction, a miscalculation, a return to familiar commitments. This interruption restores coherence. The system stabilizes again at the old level. Another factor reinforcing repetition is emotional baseline. Emotional baseline refers to the state a person returns to when external pressure fades. For many, this baseline includes anxiety around money, vigilance about scarcity, or tension around security. These emotional states become normal. Normal does not mean pleasant. Normal means familiar. When financial conditions improve, the nervous system reacts. Increased income, savings, or opportunity can trigger unease. The system senses deviation from baseline and attempts to correct it. Correction may look like overspending, or abandoning a new habit, or rejecting an opportunity, or creating a crisis that restores familiarity. This is not self-destruction, it is self-regulation. The system regulates back to what it recognizes. Understanding this removes blame. People do not repeat patterns because they are weak or undisciplined. They repeat patterns because their internal structure has not been updated to accommodate new outcomes. Updating structure requires identity-level change. Identity change does not happen through information. It happens through repeated experience of safety within a new state. Until safety is established, the system resists permanence. This is why temporary success often collapses. A raise without identity shift creates pressure. A financial windfall without internal coherence creates instability. A sudden opportunity without structural readiness creates anxiety. The invisible decision-maker responds by restoring balance. Balance, again, is not prosperity. Balance is familiarity. This mechanism explains why smart people often cycle between improvement and regression. Progress feels exciting but unstable. Regression feels disappointing but grounding. Grounding feels safer. The system chooses safety. True financial change requires redefining what safety means. It requires expanding the internal definition of normal to include stability, growth, and ease, without threat. This expansion cannot be forced. It emerges through gradual exposure and internal permission. When identity begins to shift, repetition loses its grip. Patterns weaken. Decisions change without effort. The mind stops arguing. Intelligence becomes supportive instead of defensive. Smart people do not lose their intelligence in this process. They finally stop using it to protect the past. This chapter is not an accusation against intelligence. It is an explanation of its limits. Understanding limits creates freedom, because once the invisible decision-maker is acknowledged, intelligence can be redirected. Not to justify repetition, but to support reorganization. And when reorganization begins, patterns that lasted decades can dissolve quietly, not through willpower, not through belief, but through alignment. Chapter 3. Identity as a financial filter. Every financial opportunity passes through a filter before it becomes a decision. This filter is not logic, it is not intelligence, it is not even conscious preference. It is identity. Identity functions as a silent gatekeeper. It determines what is noticed, what is ignored, what feels possible, and what feels unreachable. Long before a person evaluates numbers, risks, or benefits, identity has already categorized the situation. Some options feel immediately not for me. Others feel interesting but distant. Some feel threatening without a clear reason. Others feel familiar, even when they lead to poor outcomes. This filtering process happens automatically. Identity does not ask whether an opportunity is objectively good. It asks whether it fits the internal definition of self. This is why two people can be presented with the same financial opportunity and react in completely different ways. One feels curiosity, the other feels discomfort. One leans forward, the other withdraws. The opportunity itself is neutral. The response is not. The response is filtered. Identity determines what a person allows themselves to consider seriously. It sets invisible boundaries around imagination. It decides which futures feel realistic and which feel inappropriate, dangerous, or unrealistic. These boundaries are rarely verbalized. They exist as assumptions. I'm not that kind of person. People like me don't do that. That world isn't for someone like me. These statements often go unnoticed, but they carry enormous weight. They quietly exclude entire categories of opportunity without debate. Identity is not built from facts. It is built from repetition, from early experiences, from social reinforcement, from emotional memory. It is shaped by what was rewarded, punished, encouraged, or discouraged over time. Once established, identity seeks confirmation. It looks for evidence that reinforces its structure and dismisses evidence that threatens it. This confirmation process feels like intuition, but it is alignment preservation. When financial opportunities challenge identity, the body often reacts before the mind can explain. There may be tension, hesitation, anxiety, or sudden loss of interest. These sensations are signals that the opportunity does not align with the current self-concept. The invisible decision-maker interprets this as danger. Danger does not mean loss of money. It means loss of coherence. Coherence is the state in which internal elements agree with each other. Identity, emotion, expectation, and behavior point in the same direction. When coherence is threatened, the system reacts defensively. This reaction is subtle. It rarely feels like fear. More often, it feels like logic. This doesn't seem stable. This feels risky. I should stick to what I know. These thoughts feel reasonable, but they are post-rationalizations. The filter has already acted. Identity filters not only opportunities, but also effort. It determines how much energy a person is willing to invest, how long they persist, and when they retreat. If a financial path aligns with identity, effort feels sustainable. If it does not, effort feels draining. This explains why some people work tirelessly in certain areas and feel exhausted in others, even when the external reward is similar. Identity supports some actions and resists others. The filter also affects perception of time. Opportunities that align with identity feel urgent or right now. Those that do not align feel premature or ill-timed. Timing, in this sense, is subjective. It reflects readiness of identity, not external conditions. This is why people often say they missed their chance. The chance existed, but identity was not prepared to let it pass through the filter. Money does not respond to desire. It responds to allowed behavior. Allowed behavior is behavior that feels coherent with identity. This is why income often plateaus at levels that match self-concept. When income exceeds identity, tension arises. The system attempts to restore balance. Sometimes this happens through overspending, sometimes through loss of motivation, sometimes through rejection of further opportunity. This is not punishment, it is regulation. Identity regulates outcomes to maintain internal consistency. Understanding this reframes financial struggle. It shifts focus away from external obstacles and toward internal filters. The question is no longer, how do I get more? But, what am I allowing myself to be? This question is uncomfortable because it touches self-definition. Changing identity feels like loss. Even when the old identity is limiting, it is familiar. Familiarity provides safety. The invisible decision-maker values safety above improvement. When identity expands, safety must expand with it. Without safety, the filter tightens. Opportunities bounce off instead of passing through. This expansion does not happen through force. Forcing identity change creates internal conflict. Conflict strengthens resistance. Identity changes through exposure and permission. Exposure to new states without collapse. Permission to exist within unfamiliar conditions without self-judgment. When identity begins to loosen, the filter widens. Options that were previously invisible become noticeable. Opportunities that felt threatening become neutral. Neutrality is a sign of alignment shift. This shift often goes unnoticed at first. People may say, I don't know why, but this feels different. That difference is the filter adjusting. As the filter adjusts, decisions change without effort. Behavior reorganizes. Financial reality begins to reflect the new allowance. Money follows permission. Permission is not belief. It is not affirmation. It is internal agreement. Agreement that a new level of responsibility is tolerable. Agreement that ease does not threaten worth. Agreement that stability does not require struggle. These agreements reshape identity. Once reshaped, the filter updates automatically. This is why lasting financial change often feels gradual and quiet. There is no dramatic moment, no single decision, just a series of small shifts that accumulate into a different pattern. The invisible decision-maker does not need to be convinced. It needs to feel safe. When safety is established, resistance dissolves. The filter opens. This chapter is not instructing you to chase opportunity. It is inviting you to observe what your identity allows to pass through. Because until the filter is recognized, it will continue operating invisibly, and once it is recognized, it can begin to change. Chapter 4. The Comfort Zone of Struggle. Struggle is not always a problem to be solved. For many people, it is an identity to be preserved. This statement may feel uncomfortable because struggle is usually associated with difficulty, pain, and limitation. It is rarely seen as something people would unconsciously choose. And yet, struggle often functions as a psychological comfort zone, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. Familiarity creates safety. The invisible decision-maker prioritizes safety over improvement. It does not ask whether an experience is pleasant. It asks whether it is known. For individuals who grew up associating effort with worth, struggle becomes proof of value. Rest feels undeserved. Ease feels suspicious. Stability feels temporary. When financial life begins to feel lighter, something inside reacts. This reaction is rarely conscious. People may say they feel unmotivated, restless, or off balance. They may suddenly create new problems, increase obligations, or return to old habits. These behaviors appear irrational, but they serve a purpose. They restore familiarity. Struggle confirms identity. If identity was formed around perseverance, sacrifice, or endurance, then ease threatens coherence. Without struggle, the self-image feels incomplete. The system compensates by recreating conditions that reaffirm the old identity. This is why financial progress often triggers self-sabotage. The moment stability increases, tension appears. The moment income improves, new expenses arise. The moment freedom becomes possible, guilt emerges. These reactions are not moral failures. They are regulatory mechanisms. The system is not resisting success. It is protecting identity. Many people unconsciously equate struggle with morality. They believe that working hard makes them deserving, while ease implies laziness or irresponsibility. These beliefs are rarely examined, but they are deeply ingrained through cultural narratives, family dynamics, and early conditioning. When money begins to flow more easily, these narratives are challenged. The internal structure does not immediately adapt. Instead, it seeks to restore the familiar emotional state associated with effort and tension. This is the comfort zone of struggle. It is not comfortable in the traditional sense. It is emotionally charged, exhausting, and often painful. But it is known. And what is known feels safer than what is unfamiliar, even when the unfamiliar is better. This comfort zone shapes financial behavior in subtle ways. People may choose harder paths, even when simpler ones are available. They may reject opportunities that feel too easy. They may distrust outcomes that arrive without significant effort. These choices feel ethical or prudent on the surface, but beneath them lies allegiance to identity. Struggle becomes a form of self-consistency. Leaving the comfort zone of struggle requires redefining self-worth. It requires decoupling value from effort. This decoupling is deeply destabilizing for those whose identity depends on endurance. Without struggle, who am I? This question is rarely spoken, but it drives behavior. The invisible decision-maker responds by maintaining conditions that answer the question without ambiguity. As long as struggle continues, identity remains intact. Financial environments often reinforce this dynamic. Society frequently glorifies overwork, burnout, and sacrifice, framing them as signs of character. Ease is often portrayed as irresponsible unless it is justified by visible hardship. These narratives strengthen the internal association between struggle and legitimacy. When financial reality begins to contradict this association, the system reacts defensively. This reaction may appear as procrastination, or loss of momentum, or sudden risk aversion, or impulsive spending that destabilizes progress. Each behavior serves the same function, restoring the familiar emotional landscape. The comfort zone of struggle is also reinforced by emotional baseline. Emotional baseline refers to the emotional state a person considers normal. For many, this baseline includes tension, worry, and vigilance around money. When these emotions are absent, the system senses absence as danger. It attempts to reintroduce familiar stressors. This is why people often say they feel uncomfortable when things are going well. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that identity has not yet expanded to include ease. Expansion requires safety. The system must learn that ease does not equal collapse, that stability does not lead to loss of purpose, that worth does not depend on struggle. This learning does not happen through logic. It happens through repeated exposure to new conditions without negative consequences. Each time ease is experienced without punishment, the identity loosens slightly. Each time stability persists, the comfort zone shifts. This shift is gradual. During this transition, people may feel disoriented. Old motivations fade. New motivations have not yet formed. This in-between state can feel empty, but it is fertile. The invisible decision-maker is recalibrating. If this recalibration is interrupted by guilt, fear, or self-judgment, the system retreats. It returns to struggle because struggle is reliable. If the recalibration is allowed, the comfort zone expands. As the comfort zone expands, financial behavior changes naturally. Decisions no longer seek tension. Effort becomes intentional instead of compulsive. Opportunities are evaluated based on coherence rather than moral worth. Money begins to respond differently because identity has shifted. This does not mean struggle disappears entirely. It means struggle is no longer required for self-validation. This distinction is crucial. Struggle chosen consciously is growth. Struggle chosen unconsciously is repetition. The comfort zone of struggle dissolves when identity no longer needs it to feel legitimate. This chapter is not asking you to reject effort or discipline. It is asking you to observe whether struggle has become a requirement for self-worth. Because as long as struggle is required, financial reality will continue to recreate it. When struggle is no longer necessary for identity, reality reorganizes, not dramatically, not instantly, but coherently. And coherence is what the invisible law responds to. Chapter 5. Why money responds to consistency, not desire. Desire is loud. It announces itself clearly. It speaks in goals, wishes, and intentions. Consistency, by contrast, is quiet. It does not declare what it wants. It reveals what is already being lived. Money does not respond to what is loudly desired. It responds to what is consistently embodied. This distinction explains why many people desire financial change intensely and yet experience little movement. Desire fluctuates. It rises with inspiration and falls with fatigue. It is influenced by mood, circumstances, and emotion. Consistency, however, remains when emotion fades. The invisible decision-maker does not track desire. It tracks pattern. Patterns are built through repetition, through what happens daily, not occasionally, through what is chosen when no one is watching, not when motivation is high. Money organizes itself around these patterns. This is why financial outcomes are often predictable long before they appear. Long before a number changes on a screen, behavior has already stabilized into a rhythm. That rhythm communicates expectation. Expectation is not hope. Expectation is assumption. Assumption is stable. When a person desires abundance but consistently behaves from scarcity, scarcity is the strongest signal. When a person desires stability but repeatedly engages in chaotic financial behavior, chaos becomes familiar. Money responds accordingly. This response is not punishment. It is coherence. The system seeks alignment between internal structure and external reality. Desire often points toward the future. Consistency exists in the present. Reality responds to the present state, not the imagined one. This is why short bursts of motivation rarely change long-term financial outcomes. Motivation creates action temporarily, but unless that action becomes normal, it does not alter identity. And without identity change, patterns return. Consistency reshapes identity. Each repeated behavior reinforces a self-concept. Each self-concept reinforces expectation. Each expectation guides future behavior. This loop operates quietly, but it is powerful. Money reflects this loop faithfully. Many people misunderstand this process and assume that wanting something strongly enough should be sufficient. They confuse emotional intensity with structural signal. Emotional intensity is not stable. It cannot sustain coherence. Coherence requires predictability. Money responds to predictability because predictability reduces uncertainty. Systems favor environments where signals are clear and reliable. Inconsistent signals create instability. Stability attracts organization. This is why consistent but modest financial behavior often produces better results than sporadic, intense efforts. The system reads consistency as reliability. Reliability invites expansion. This principle applies regardless of income level. Consistency can exist within scarcity or abundance. What matters is not scale, but stability of pattern. If a person consistently saves small amounts, the system registers accumulation. If a person consistently overspends when stressed, the system registers depletion. If a person consistently avoids financial decisions, the system registers avoidance. Money mirrors these registrations. Desire alone does not register because it lacks embodiment. Embodiment is action that repeats without force. When behavior requires constant effort, it is not yet embodied. When behavior becomes automatic, it has entered identity. Identity is the level at which money responds. This explains why people often experience sudden financial shifts after long periods of apparent stagnation. The shift did not happen suddenly. The pattern stabilized quietly over time. Once stability was established, the external reflection appeared. The delay creates the illusion that desire finally worked. In reality, consistency finally accumulated enough signal strength to reorganize outcomes. The invisible decision-maker is patient. It does not rush to respond to temporary states. It waits for confirmation through repetition. This patience is often misinterpreted as resistance. People assume the system is blocking them. In truth, the system is observing. Observation precedes response. This is also why inconsistency resets progress. When patterns fluctuate, the signal weakens. The system hesitates to reorganize because the direction is unclear. Clarity is not achieved through intensity. It is achieved through steadiness. Steadiness is rarely exciting. It does not feel transformative in the moment. It feels ordinary. This ordinariness is what allows identity to update without alarm. Once identity updates, desire becomes irrelevant. The system responds to who a person has become, not what they want. This is why financial change that lasts often feels anticlimactic. There is no dramatic turning point, just a gradual realization that behavior has shifted and outcomes are following. Desire may initiate awareness, but consistency sustains transformation. Without consistency, desire creates frustration. With consistency, desire becomes unnecessary. Money responds when the internal environment becomes predictable. Predictability creates trust. Trust allows expansion. This trust is not emotional, it is structural. When the system trusts that a pattern will continue, it reorganizes resources accordingly. Opportunities align, timing improves, resistance decreases. None of this requires belief. It requires coherence. Coherence is when behavior, expectation, and identity agree with each other consistently. Desire may come and go, but coherence remains. This chapter is not suggesting that desire is wrong. Desire signals direction, but direction without movement does not change position. Movement without consistency does not change trajectory. Consistency shapes trajectory. This is the quiet truth most people overlook. They focus on what they want instead of what they repeat. They track goals instead of patterns. They monitor motivation instead of behavior. Money does not listen to motivation. It listens to repetition. When repetition changes, reality follows, not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. Chapter 6. Small decisions that reveal identity. Most people believe that major financial outcomes are created by major decisions. They focus on big moments, investments, career changes, large purchases, or opportunities that appear to alter everything at once. But these moments are not where identity is revealed. Identity reveals itself in small decisions. Small decisions feel insignificant. They pass unnoticed. They do not trigger reflection or analysis, and precisely because they feel unimportant, they are honest. They are not performed. They are not optimized. They are automatic expressions of internal structure. The invisible decision-maker is most visible in moments that feel trivial. How a person reacts to a small, unexpected expense, how they treat surplus money, even in small amounts, how they respond to minor financial inconvenience, how they justify small compromises. These moments do not feel meaningful, but they are consistent, and consistency is where identity lives. Small decisions repeat more often than large ones. They accumulate. They reinforce patterns quietly. Over time, they shape outcomes far more powerfully than occasional dramatic choices. Money does not respond to dramatic intention. It responds to habitual behavior. Habitual behavior emerges from identity. This is why people often say, it's just a small thing. Small things are never small when repeated. They communicate expectation. They reinforce internal agreements about scarcity, safety, controls, and worth. When a person repeatedly treats money as something that disappears quickly, the system learns impermanence. When a person repeatedly delays financial responsibility just this once, the system learns avoidance. When a person repeatedly prioritizes immediate relief over long-term coherence, the system learns short-term regulation. These lessons are not learned consciously, they are embodied. The invisible decision-maker watches repetition, not explanation. People often explain small decisions away. They justify them logically. They minimize their impact. But the system does not respond to explanation. It responds to pattern density. Pattern density increases through repetition. This is why financial realities often feel stubborn. People believe they are making good decisions because they focus on major moments. But the foundation is built by hundreds of small actions that reinforce the same internal structure. Identity does not reveal itself under pressure. It reveals itself when no pressure is present, when there is no audience, when no result is at stake, when no identity performance is required. In these moments, the invisible decision-maker acts freely. This is why sudden financial windfalls often disappear quickly. Without pressure, identity expresses itself. Spending patterns revert. Decisions reflect familiar regulation strategies. The system restores coherence. Large changes without small identity alignment create instability. Stability is built from the bottom up. Small decisions are not about discipline. They are about agreement. They reveal what the system expects to happen next. Expectation guides behavior automatically. If a person expects money to run out, small decisions accelerate depletion. If a person expects instability, small decisions recreate urgency. If a person expects struggle, small decisions reintroduce friction. These expectations operate quietly. They are rarely spoken, but they are powerful. Small decisions also reveal tolerance. What a person tolerates financially. Small inefficiencies, small leaks, small misalignments communicates self-concept. Tolerance teaches the system what is acceptable. The system expands what is tolerated. This expansion does not happen suddenly. It grows incrementally. This is why small misalignments matter. They train identity gradually. They shape internal boundaries. Over time, they define what feels normal. Normal is the strongest signal the system receives. People often try to change normal through willpower. They attempt to override habits without updating identity. This creates tension. Tension eventually collapses. Normal reasserts itself. Lasting change requires redefining what feels normal. This redefinition begins with awareness. Awareness does not judge small decisions. It observes them. Judgment creates resistance. Resistance strengthens identity. Observation softens it. When small decisions are observed without justification, patterns become visible. When patterns become visible, identity loosens. This loosening is subtle. It does not feel like transformation. It feels like interruption. Interruptions create space. In that space, new responses can emerge. The invisible decision-maker adjusts when it detects safety in change. Small adjustments signal safety more effectively than dramatic ones. Gradual shifts feel manageable. They do not threaten coherence. This is why sustainable financial change often begins with unremarkable shifts. Slight changes in reaction, slight changes in tolerance, slight changes in default behavior. Over time, these slight changes accumulate into a different pattern density. Pattern density reshapes identity. Identity reshapes expectation. Expectation reshapes financial reality. This process is slow, but it is reliable. Money does not respond to declarations. It responds to what happens consistently. Small decisions are where consistency is formed. This chapter is not asking you to control every detail. It is inviting you to notice where identity speaks most honestly, because the invisible decision-maker does not reveal itself in big promises. It reveals itself in small moments that repeat. And once those moments change, reality follows. Quietly, gradually, inevitably. Chapter 7. Why Force Does Not Change Financial Reality. Force is often mistaken for commitment. Effort is often confused with alignment. Many people believe that if they push hard enough, insist long enough, or discipline themselves strictly enough, financial reality will eventually respond. This belief feels logical. It aligns with cultural narratives that glorify struggle, endurance, and relentless effort. But force does not change financial reality. It only compresses it temporarily. The invisible decision-maker does not respond to pressure. Pressure signals instability. When a system is pressured, it does not expand. It contracts. It protects itself. It returns to familiar regulation patterns. This is why forced financial change rarely lasts. People force budgets they cannot sustain. They force saving behaviors that feel restrictive. They force productivity rhythms that exhaust them. At first, results may appear. Progress seems visible. But beneath the surface, resistance accumulates. The system tolerates force only for short periods. Once tolerance is exceeded, correction occurs. Correction restores coherence. This correction is often interpreted as failure. In reality, it is regulation. Force attempts to override identity instead of reorganizing it. Identity experiences this override as threat. Threat activates defensive behavior. Defensive behavior prioritizes short-term relief over long-term coherence. This relief may look like impulsive spending, or abandonment of financial plans, or loss of motivation, or rationalization of regression. Each response serves the same purpose: removing pressure. The system does not reject change. It rejects coercion. Coercion creates internal conflict. Conflict fractures alignment. When alignment fractures, the signal to reality becomes unstable. Money responds to instability by withholding expansion. This is not punishment, it is pattern recognition. Many people confuse intensity with effectiveness. They believe that strong emotion, strict rules, or rigid control will accelerate change. But intensity amplifies contradiction if identity has not shifted. A person may intensely want financial freedom while intensely fearing responsibility. Force magnifies both signals. Reality receives mixed instructions. Mixed instructions delay response. Force also narrows perception. When effort is forced, attention collapses around control. People focus on avoiding mistakes rather than creating coherence. Fear of error replaces clarity of direction. Fear is not alignment. Fear-based behavior is reactive. Reactive patterns fluctuate. Fluctuation weakens signal consistency. Money does not respond to reactivity. It responds to stability. This explains why people who appear less disciplined sometimes experience smoother financial trajectories. Their behavior may be simpler, but it is consistent. Their system is not in constant negotiation with itself. Negotiation consumes energy. When a person is constantly negotiating with themselves, forcing, resisting, correcting, restarting, identity remains divided. Division sustains repetition. True financial change requires internal agreement. Agreement cannot be forced. It must be allowed. Allowance creates resonance. Resonance is the state in which behavior feels natural rather than imposed. When actions align with identity, they require less effort. They sustain themselves. The system relaxes. Relaxation is often misunderstood as complacency. In reality, relaxation signals safety. Safety allows expansion. The invisible decision-maker expands only when safety is present. Force removes safety. This is why forced habits collapse during stress. Stress exposes what is not integrated. Under pressure, the system returns to its default regulation patterns. These defaults reveal identity. Identity does not change under force. It changes under familiarity. Familiarity with new behavior, repeated without threat, updates identity gradually. This update does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary. Ordinary behavior is absorbed more easily than extraordinary effort. This is why sustainable financial habits often feel almost boring. They lack intensity, they lack emotional charge, but they persist. Persistence updates identity. Once identity updates, behavior no longer needs to be forced. It becomes self-reinforcing. The system no longer resists. It cooperates. Money responds to cooperation. Cooperation creates coherence. Coherence creates predictability. Predictability invites expansion. Force disrupts this sequence. This chapter is not suggesting that effort is useless. Effort has its place. But effort must emerge from alignment, not opposition. Effort that arises naturally is sustainable. Effort that is imposed is temporary. Imposed effort teaches the system that change is dangerous. Aligned effort teaches the system that change is safe. The difference is subtle, but the outcome is profound. Many people remain trapped in cycles of forcing and collapsing. They interpret collapse as personal weakness. This interpretation reinforces identity. Identity reinforces repetition. Breaking this cycle requires removing force. Removing force does not mean removing intention. It means releasing coercion. It means allowing identity to reorganize at a pace that does not trigger defense. Defense maintains the old. Allowance introduces the new. The invisible decision-maker responds when it detects internal agreement. Agreement does not shout. It does not demand. It stabilizes quietly. When stabilization occurs, financial reality adjusts automatically, not because pressure increased, but because resistance dissolved. This chapter is an invitation to observe where force has replaced alignment, where control has replaced coherence, where effort has become a substitute for identity change. Because as long as force is required, reality will continue to resist. When force ends, movement begins, not suddenly, not dramatically, but sustainably. Chapter 8. The Silent Role of Emotional Baseline. Most people believe their financial decisions are driven by thought. In reality, they are driven by emotion. Not intense emotion, but baseline emotion. The emotional state a person considers normal quietly shapes every interaction with money. Emotional baseline is not how you feel on your best days or your worst days. It is the emotional background you return to when nothing unusual is happening. It is the tone beneath your thoughts, the atmosphere behind your decisions. This baseline is rarely questioned. People adapt to it. They assume it is neutral, but it is not neutral. It is regulatory. The invisible decision-maker uses emotional baseline as a reference point. It seeks to maintain emotional familiarity. When financial situations move away from this baseline, internal mechanisms activate to restore it. This is why financial improvement can feel strangely uncomfortable. When money reduces stress, the system may interpret calm as unfamiliar. When instability decreases, the system may perceive boredom or emptiness. These sensations trigger corrective behavior. Corrective behavior is not conscious sabotage. It is emotional regulation. If a person's emotional baseline includes tension, urgency, or mild anxiety, financial calm creates contrast. The system attempts to reintroduce familiar emotion. This may happen through unnecessary worry, impulsive decisions, or disruption of stability. The goal is not harm. The goal is emotional consistency. Money becomes a tool for maintaining emotional baseline. This explains why some people unconsciously recreate financial stress even when external conditions improve. The stress feels normal. It feels grounding. Without it, the system lacks reference. Emotional baseline is shaped early, through family dynamics, through observed financial behavior, through repeated emotional responses to money-related events. Over time, these responses stabilize into expectation. Expectation guides behavior automatically. If expectation includes anxiety, decisions reflect caution. If expectation includes urgency, decisions reflect impulsivity. If expectation includes scarcity, decisions reflect contraction. These behaviors are not chosen, they are expressed. The invisible decision-maker does not differentiate between emotional states caused by external events and those caused by internal habits. It simply seeks to maintain baseline. When financial reality threatens to alter baseline, resistance appears. This resistance may look like overthinking, or second-guessing, or unnecessary complication, or subtle withdrawal from opportunity. Each behavior restores emotional familiarity. This dynamic often confuses people. They believe they want peace, ease, or stability. But when these states arrive, discomfort appears. The system reacts to discomfort by destabilizing the situation. This is not contradiction. It is conditioning. Emotional baseline is deeply tied to identity. It defines what feels like me. Changing baseline feels like changing self. This is why emotional baseline shifts slowly. Sudden calm can feel unsafe. Sudden ease can feel suspicious. The system prefers gradual adjustment. Gradual adjustment requires repeated exposure without collapse. When a person experiences calm repeatedly and nothing bad happens, baseline begins to soften. When stability persists, expectation adjusts. When ease becomes familiar, identity updates. This process cannot be forced. Forced emotional regulation creates suppression. Suppression strengthens baseline. Awareness is the entry point. Not awareness of thought, but awareness of emotion. Noticing emotional responses without correcting them allows the system to observe itself. Observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice interrupts automatic regulation. This interruption does not require action. It requires permission. Permission to feel unfamiliar emotion without reacting. When unfamiliar calm is allowed, baseline stretches. When stretched repeatedly, it shifts. As baseline shifts, financial behavior changes naturally. Decisions feel less reactive, timing improves, opportunity feels less threatening. Money responds to this shift because the internal environment has stabilized at a new level. This is why financial change often follows emotional regulation rather than strategy. Strategy without baseline alignment collapses. Alignment allows strategy to function. The invisible decision-maker responds to emotional steadiness. Steadiness signals safety. Safety allows expansion. This chapter is not asking you to control emotion. Control increases tension. It is inviting you to notice what emotion feels normal in your financial life. Because until emotional baseline changes, outcomes will return to match it. When baseline shifts, reality reorganizes. Quietly, naturally, without effort. And Beza Tui of Chapter 9. When identity changes, reality has no choice. Most people wait for external proof before allowing themselves to change. They wait for more money, more stability, more certainty, believing that once reality shifts, they will finally feel different. But this sequence is inverted. Reality does not lead identity. Identity leads reality. The invisible decision-maker does not wait for evidence. It organizes behavior based on internal agreement. When agreement changes, behavior changes. When behavior changes consistently, reality follows. This process feels subtle because identity rarely changes dramatically. It shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly, through accumulation. Small permissions granted repeatedly. Small tolerances adjusted gradually. Small reactions softened over time. Each shift feels insignificant on its own. Together, they reconfigure the internal structure. When identity begins to change, resistance often appears, not from the outside, but from within. Old thoughts resurface. Old habits attempt to reassert themselves. Familiar emotions arise unexpectedly. This resistance is not failure, it is confirmation. Resistance indicates that identity is reorganizing. The system is testing whether the new structure is stable enough to hold. Stability is required before reality adjusts. This is why many people retreat at the edge of change. The moment identity loosens, uncertainty increases. The system interprets uncertainty as risk. Without reassurance, it returns to the familiar. But when uncertainty is tolerated, when the system is allowed to exist without immediate resolution, identity stabilizes at a new level. Once stabilized, reality has no choice. Reality must reflect the internal structure because coherence demands it. This reflection does not arrive as a miracle. It arrives as alignment. Opportunities appear more naturally. Decisions feel less conflicted. Timing improves without explanation. Resistance decreases without effort. People often misinterpret these changes as luck or coincidence. In truth, they are structural consequences. When identity updates, perception updates. When perception updates, options expand. When options expand, outcomes diversify. Money does not suddenly arrive, it becomes allowed. Allowance is the key distinction. People often desire abundance while internally disallowing it. They disallow responsibility. They disallow visibility. They disallow ease. These disallowances block coherence. When identity changes, these disallowances soften. Responsibility feels manageable instead of heavy. Visibility feels neutral instead of threatening. Ease feels stable instead of suspicious. Once these internal permissions are granted, reality reorganizes effortlessly. This reorganization can feel anticlimactic. There is no dramatic moment, no announcement, no confirmation that it worked, just a gradual realization that life feels different. This subtlety is why many people miss the moment of change. They expect transformation to feel extraordinary. In reality, it feels normal. Normality is the signal. When a new level of income, stability, or opportunity feels normal, identity has already shifted. Reality is catching up. This chapter clarifies a common misunderstanding. Identity change is not self-improvement, it is self-permission. Permission to operate at a different level without justification. Permission to exist without constant tension. Permission to move without internal negotiation. Negotiation disappears when identity aligns. Once negotiation ends, decision-making becomes clean. Clean decisions compound quickly. Compounding creates visible results. This is why identity change often precedes rapid external change. The groundwork was laid quietly. Once coherence is achieved, momentum accelerates. Reality responds to coherence faster than it responds to desire. This response can feel almost automatic. Doors open, delays shorten. Effort produces more return. The system recognizes alignment and reorganizes efficiently. None of this requires belief. Belief fluctuates. Identity stabilizes. When identity stabilizes at a new level, reality follows because it must maintain coherence. This is not mystical, it is structural. The invisible decision-maker does not ask whether change is deserved. It asks whether it is integrated. Integration happens through repetition without resistance. This is why forcing change fails and allowing change succeeds. Allowance integrates, force fractures. This chapter is not offering techniques. It is revealing sequence. Identity first, behavior second, reality last. Reversing this sequence creates frustration. Respecting it creates flow. When identity changes, reality has no choice but to reorganize around it, quietly, naturally, inevitably. Chapter 10. The Point of No Return. There is a moment in every internal shift where returning becomes impossible. Not because something dramatic happened, not because a decision was announced, but because perception has changed. Once perception changes, reality can no longer be unseen. This is the point of no return. Most people believe change is defined by action. In truth, change is defined by recognition. The moment you recognize a pattern clearly, it loses its invisibility. What was once automatic becomes observable. What was once unconscious becomes structural knowledge, and structure cannot be forgotten. This is why true understanding feels irreversible. You may resist it, you may ignore it, you may delay acting on it, but you cannot return to innocence. You cannot unknow how identity shapes behavior. You cannot unknow how consistency creates outcome. You cannot unknow how emotional baseline regulates money. The invisible decision-maker has been exposed. From this point forward, repetition becomes visible. Choices feel different. Excuses lose weight. Justifications sound hollow, not because you are judging yourself, but because awareness has altered reference. Reference defines normal. Once reference changes, normal reorganizes. This chapter is not about doing more. It is about seeing clearly. Clear seeing removes confusion. Confusion allows delay. Clarity creates responsibility. Responsibility does not mean pressure. It means recognition of cause and effect. At this stage, many people feel a subtle discomfort, a quiet restlessness, a sense that something has shifted, even if nothing external has changed. This discomfort is not fear. It is recalibration. The system is updating. Old strategies feel less convincing. Old narratives feel thin. Old explanations fail to fully satisfy. This does not mean they are false. It means they are incomplete. Completeness has entered the frame. Once completeness appears, partial understanding can no longer dominate. This is why the point of no return does not feel exciting. It feels sober, grounded, quiet, almost ordinary. But beneath that ordinariness lies permanence. You do not need to remember this book. You will recognize it in your reactions. You will notice it when you hesitate for no clear reason, when you repeat a pattern automatically, when you feel tension where ease is available. These moments will now carry information. Information dissolves unconscious repetition. Without unconscious repetition, reality must adjust. Adjustment is not immediate, it is inevitable. From this point forward, financial outcomes will no longer feel random. Delays will feel diagnostic. Resistance will feel informative. Ease will feel earned rather than suspicious. This does not mean life becomes simple, it becomes legible. Legibility is power. When systems are legible, they can no longer operate blindly. You may still choose repetition, but it will be a choice, not an accident. Choice introduces agency. Agency reorganizes behavior. Behavior reorganizes reality. This sequence cannot be undone. This is why the archive closes here. Not because there is nothing more to say, but because what needed to be seen has already been revealed. Anything beyond this point would be instruction. And instruction without readiness creates force. Force fractures alignment. This archive was never meant to instruct, it was meant to expose. Exposure creates clarity. Clarity creates inevitability. From here, change will not come from effort. It will come from awareness meeting repetition. That meeting point is where identity evolves. Once identity evolves, reality follows, not as a reward, not as a miracle, but as a structural consequence. This is the final truth of the hidden law. It does not respond to belief. It does not respond to desire. It does not respond to effort. It responds to what you live as normal. Once you see that clearly, there is no going back. The archive closes now, but the structure remains open. Archive closing. This archive does not ask for belief. It only asks for attention. If this knowledge resonated with you, it means the structure is already active. Subscribe to remain within the archive. And if something here shifted your perception, leave a comment below. The library expands through recognition.